Hey all, Hiba here and welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Sea of Conquest. So a lot of you have asked me for a video on damage types. That video is coming right here, so don't forget to subscribe to the channel because lots of Sea of Conquest coming up. So, damage types. There are a few different damage types in the game and they are a little bit more intricate than they first seem. They're actually quite advanced. So you really got to understand how it works to get the most out of your heroes and your ships and your items in the game. Now, damage types, there is a basic damage type that just happens when you do damage, so we're not really going to worry about that in this video. We're going to worry about the more specific ones, like for example blazing damage here, and every hero has a particular damage attached to them. The first one I'll talk about is artillery damage, and it's really good at doing damage to multiple enemies in battle. So for example, if you are, battling 10 ships, then artillery damage is your thing. The next damage type I'll talk about is cutthroat damage. Now a cutthroat damage works well against single targets, right? Like powerful flagships, for example. It's not as good against multiple targets. So cutthroat damage is good at PvP, for example, when you have a limited number of enemies. Alright, so the next damage type is drowning damage. Now this damage happens over time, right? So you're not gonna walk in and give someone a critical hit. Like you have to stack this as many times as you can. All the damage types stack, by the way. Especially with the drowning damage, this is important because it works over time. So you want to get those stacks as high as possible. So as you can see, damage isn't really that simple in this game. The next damage type is blazing damage, and this damage again works over time, but in this case it's even more important because it only does damage over time. So you really have to get the stacks up. You have to get as many blazing damage items, heroes, whatever on your ship to get the stacks as high as possible. And you'll do damage over time, so it's good for long battles and targets with high armor. So for example, sea monsters, this is really good for it. So the last damage type is strategic damage, and this is kind of something in between artillery and cutthroat. I mean, it does direct damage, but it also does damage over time. So it's a jack of all trades, really. It's not as effective as some of the more potent builds with, for example, blazing or cutthroat, but it's still very powerful. So to make your ships powerful in this game here, you need to stack your damage as much as possible, and of course you need to stack the same damage type. Now of course this is just one way of doing it, but you can see here on the heroes they all have different damage types. So you really got to think about what kind of build you want on your fleet, what heroes you have, and also what levels they are, right? And it gets even more complicated than that, but that'll be the first part of the video here. Right, to create an effective build, you also have to read about the different skills of your heroes, right? Because you need to know how much percentage they do, how much percentage to what skill, and most importantly, how they stack. So there's no way around it. You just gotta, take some time and read these skills here to get the most out of your builds. Alright, the next factor in being able to build really, really powerful builds is you have to keep an eye on your ships as well, because as you can see, for example, Crimson Sentinel here, it focuses on blazing and drowning damage. So it's not just heroes and items that have these particular attributes, it's also your ships. So once you get to Warhammer, you get cutthroat damage, for example. So there's a lot to think about here. So and of course it also depends on what kind of build you want, right? Like say you're playing in a gang and you have some very good friends and you can trust them. It's probably better to specialize your builds so you can take on enemies in different ways, and that way make yourself more powerful. And then on the other hand, if you're just a solo player, you just want to probably do as much damage as possible. So there's a lot of thinking that has to go into this. So where all that thinking happens is here in your formation screen, right? This is where you put your heroes on your ship, and you can also put items on if you want. generally you would like your flagship to be as sturdy as possible. So for example, here I have Ahab on as a captain. He gives me shield. Then I just happen to have Sharky here as artillery, because yeah, I don't really have a good legendary first mate. And then I have Cordelia as gunner, because he does recovery. So this way my flagship will be really tough, and it'll allow me to stay in the battle much longer and allow my smaller ships to do more damage. Now, of course, this is what works good for me. It might not be the same for you. So if we look down to my epic ship here that I showed you before, the one that has actually built-in blazing damage as an attribute, then it would make sense to put heroes on that ship that actually does blazing damage, right? Because you wanna max and stack this as much as possible. So Lester is my captain. He does blazing damage, so we get that up there. Will, he does blazing damage as well. He's not very high level, but you can always level them up. And then Ned does blazing damage as well. So I have 3 heroes on this blazing damage ship that also does blazing damage. So that way I stack it as much as I possibly can. So in other words, what you should try to avoid is the Black Raven ship here. Not the ship, but the setup I put on here. I have Sola with blazing damage on as my captain. And then as my first mate, I have Henry Hell. He does just strategic damage. And then Oscar as my gunner, he does artillery damage. So that's 3 different damages on one ship that doesn't have any specialization, right? So this is not ideal. You should, in a perfect world, you should find heroes that do the same kind of damage for the ship here. Alright, we're moving on to the last aspect here, and that is the items, because there is another level to this. And if you, for example, look at this Burning Crown cannon here, it does 8% blazing damage. So obviously, if you have a blazing damage ship like the one I showed you before, you want to have a lot of this set on your ship, and of course you want them as a high level as well. So there's layer upon layer upon layer here of how to actually push your build to the maximum. So really, to round this off here, what you want to do is you want to have heroes on your ship that kind of work together, that synergizes their powers into being even more powerful. Like you want to stack stuff, right? So blazing damage, as another example, is just an example, right? You put blazing damage on a ship that already gives you a bonus to blazing damage, and then you obviously level your heroes, and then you add items. And it's even better if you can do a whole set, meaning all 4 items of the kind that improves your chosen damage, like for example strategic or blazing damage, right? So if all 4 items increase your blazing damage, and you have them at level 15 or whatever you need, and they're all legendary also, right? There's another thing to think about. Then you will do heaps of damage. Of course, that's difficult. That takes time to achieve, but that's why this game here is so interesting to play, really. It is a grind, but there's so many layers to it, and it takes a long time to build a very efficient formation, really. So I realize this is a little bit complicated, and there are many things to think about here. First of all, you have to think about what damage do I want to do, what heroes do I have, what ships do I have, what does my gang want me to do, what does my friends want me to do, how do we play the ship, and of course, what items do I have, what legendary items do I have, what level are my legendary items, and what sets could you possibly have access to. So all these things need to be considered, and then you have to build, like I just showed in this video, the best formation that you can possibly do, right? It's not easy, it takes time, and it does take a little bit of money if you want to buy some of the better captains, but that's just the way it is. So I hope this made sense now. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to put them in the comments. I will answer what I can, and of course, don't forget to subscribe. So hopefully you enjoyed it, and I'll see you out there.